We've got a great guest with us right now. I'm very excited to talk to Jennifer Say. She's an American author, filmmaker, business executive, retired artistic gymnast. She was the 1986 USA Gymnast National Champion and a 7-time member of the U.S. Women's National Team. She produced the 2020 Emmy Award-winning documentary film Athlete A, which connected the crimes of Larry Nassar to systemic abuses in the Olympic movement. She was also the chief marketing officer and brand president at Levi Strauss until her very vocal opposition to the extended closure of San Francisco's public schools during the COVID pandemic. She wrote about the experience in this book, her recent memoir called Levi's Unbuttoned. Please welcome to the show, Jennifer Say. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Jimmy.
So I just want to read a little bit. This is the description at Amazon of the book. So I just want to read a little bit of it. So you describe yourself formally as left of center progressive, and but everything changed when you publicly opposed the closure of San Francisco's public schools at the height of the pandemic. In response to her wrong think, management gave her a choice: shut up or leave. She decided that defending at-risk children was more important than the job that she loved, and so she resigned. After more than 2 decades at the company, she gave up her professional future in order to retain her voice. So that's quite it. So let's start. I just want to give people the backup. So we'll talk. I want to talk about your gymnastic stuff because that really lays the foundation. Because you've been a fighter your whole life. You've been willing to take on the status quo and have people turn on you. And this is just another example of that. So you went to work at Levi's in 1999, and you shot up the ranks very quickly, correct?
It was a slow and steady climb, but I mean, I was there 23 years all in. So I started entry level and ended as the brand president.
Yes, and you were next in line to be CEO.
That's right.
And so in March 2020, you were already speaking out against school closure. So I just want to tell people, just to let them know, we've already covered this on the show. For children without a serious medical condition, the danger of severe COVID is so low as to be difficult to quantify. The risk of long COVID among children, a source of fear among many parents, is also very low. That was in the New York Times, and that was in 2021 that was in there. They also said this in New York Intelligence magazine. It said, according to the CDC, among children, the mortality risk from COVID-19 is actually lower than from the flu. So, and now that was when we had the Delta virus, which was more virulent than the Omicron. The Omicron is less virulent, been more contagious. And so I just want to show this. This is from July 2020. So get this, the doctors, so NBC News, which is owned by Big Pharma, you know that, they did a segment and then they asked all the doctors, pediatricians, if they would send their kids back to school in the fall. This is in 2020. Listen to what they say and watch the chagrin of the host. Watch this.
Would you let your kids go back to school?
I will. My kids are looking forward to it.
Yes. Period. Absolutely.
Absolutely. As much as I can.
Without a hesitation.
Without a hesitation, yes.
I have no concerns about sending my child to school in the fall.
I would let my kids go back to school.
Dr. John Torres, NBC News.
What happened after that?
Yes.
Huh, they all said yes. They all said yes. So why? So you, in March of 2020, you were on board and they all knew it. So what do you think happened? Why do you think nobody followed what the doctors were saying? Why did we have lockdowns?
Well, you forgot what happened right after this. These pediatricians saying they'd send their kids back is Trump said schools need to open. And then the American Academy of Pediatrics reversed their recommendation in the summer of 2020. But let me add one thing, if I might. As early as March, it was already known that the median age of death was over 80, I think, coming out of Italy. So there were already articles being written sporadically. I found them that kids were at very, very little risk and that long-term school closures were never part of any pre-pandemic playbook because they're too harmful. They're too harmful to the most vulnerable among us. And in this case with COVID, where children were actually not at equal risk, it was especially egregious. So I was outspoken from the get-go. And San Francisco, I think, was the very first school district to announce school closures on March 13th, 2020.
And so you were right, by the way. So just spoiler alert, she was correct on the science, because now everybody who was for locking down the schools is now trying to pretend that they were never for locking down the schools. And who am I talking about? I'm talking about Dr. Fauci. Here he is bragging, or he's going to tell us that he recommended we shut down not just schools, but the whole country. Listen to this.
I recommended to the president that we shut the country down. And that was a very difficult decision because I knew it would have serious economic consequences.
And so here he is now trying to deny it.
Down schools if you had to do it all over again.
Well, again, it's first of all, I didn't recommend locking anything down. So Dr. Fauci is a unbridled pathological liar. Every time he opens his mouth, he's lying. We've documented he's lied about masks. He lied about the origin of the virus. He lied about funding the virus. He lied to Congress about that twice, which is a felony. He lied about herd immunity. He lied about natural immunity. He's lied about everything at every step. He's a criminal liar and should be in prison. And you were right about this. You were right about it. So when they started closing down, so I just want to show you were right about it. Now everybody's coming around to pretend they were on your side. Unfortunately, you lost your job over this. So just walk us through. In March, you started speaking out against school closures, right? In San Francisco.
I did. In San Francisco, and then, eventually more broadly nationally. In San Francisco, 50,000 public school children were shut out of school. The private schools closed at first as well, but of course they opened not too long thereafter, and that was fine. And I was alarmed from the beginning. The data was there from the beginning. And so I was vocal on social media. Eventually, no one followed me. I didn't think anybody would notice. But eventually, those of us who opposed the lockdowns and the school closures, we all found each other, and I developed a little bit of a following. Eventually, I wrote op-eds. I led rallies in San Francisco. I ended up on the local news. I became especially incensed when the private schools opened in September of 2020 in my city of San Francisco, while public schools remained stubbornly closed with no sign of opening anytime soon. And of course, at this point, my peers at the company, other executives, as well as my boss, are telling me, you have to stop talking about this. You really need to think about it. When you speak on behalf of the company. I said, I don't. I'm a mom of four. I'm speaking on behalf of myself as a citizen of San Francisco. I was urged repeatedly. I would ask, do I have to stop? They had acknowledged they couldn't tell me I had to stop, but it got more and more heated. And I just, when they sent their kids back to school, because they all sent their kids to private school, I was the only one with kids in public. Go ahead.
So wait a minute. So your kids are in public school and you start advocating for them to open the public schools. Meanwhile, all the executives that you work with at Levi, all their kids go to private school and their private schools are open.
Yeah, and they're not too scared to send their kids to school. They clearly think in-person learning is better and that it matters, and they're sending their kids. And at the same time, behind the scenes, they're telling me, you have to stop. This is controversial. And I would say, based on, my history in gymnastics, and we can get to that next, this is, an extension of my advocacy on behalf of children. I don't have my title in my bio on social media. When I'm on the news, it always just says mom of four. I was very, very careful not to identify myself. During this time when I was getting all this pushback from my peers, I got promoted to brand president. So that's evidence of the fact that I was actually doing a good job. Right? You don't promote someone from chief marketing officer to brand president and say, you could be the CEO one day if they're not doing a good job. Our business was great coming out of lockdown when our stores had been closed. All that's fine. Then in the spring of 2021, I made the fatal mistake of going on Fox News when invited. And that
so you got invited onto the Laura Ingraham show to tell your story about you standing up against the COVID policy of locking down schools. So you go on that. By the way, that's not allowed, right? Now,
well, I know.
So you would have.
So let me just put it this way, because the same thing happens to me. I get invited to go talk about my issues on Tucker Carlson's show, and the reason why I do that is because I'm not invited to go anywhere else at anyone else's show. I'll go anywhere and send my message of anti-war and peace. And I'll do that anywhere. Tucker Carlson's the only one who invites me on because he's the only one willing to go against the establishment narrative on Ukraine and Syria and other places like that. Now, you went on Laura Ingraham because you weren't being invited on anybody else's show, right?
That's right. And we tried. I mean, I at this point had developed a network of moms across the country. We called ourselves Open Schools Moms. We tried. We'd approached the New York Times. We approached CNN. Nobody would have us. They never had a mom. It was just sort of one incendiary statement after the next about how if the schools opened, all the teachers would die. And they would put forth these metrics that were impossible to meet. You know, the CDC guidelines, as influenced by the teachers union, were so impossible to meet, it made it clear that the schools would never open. They wouldn't invite us to talk about the harms being done. And Laura Ingraham, look, I never watched the show. You know, I knew the reputation. I consulted my Open Schools Network. They said it's going to be incendiary, but you should do it. It's a platform. A lot of people watch the show. And to her credit, she was, I believe, the first national news personality, I think as early as late April, to say this is wrong. The lockdowns are doing more harm than good. The school closures are. So I went on the show. I said nothing I regret. I would do it again, and I would say it to her. But that unleashed the beast, as you might imagine. Employees began to complain incessantly. The social media mob came after me, and it just became more and more heated. Now, I should say I survived almost another year at the company, even after that, because I was still doing a good job. But the employees were very angry. I shouldn't even say the employees. A tiny, tiny percentage, a very woke, very angry, you know, I get to say what I want and she is evil. She's a conspiracy theorist. She's a racist. She hates masks. She's anti-vax.
And so what? So would you ever have a conversation with any other of the executives at Levi and you would say to them, but your kids are going to school. How could you?
Oh, yeah.
And what would they say back to you?
You just can't. It's too, I mean, even the head of HR said to me, Jen, you're right, but you just can't say these things.
What? I mean, so what is that? So it's like cult-like behavior, right? That's like
it is. Yes. As you discussed in an earlier segment, it's cult-like behavior. These are the tenets and the beliefs of the cult. If you violate them, you're a heretic. We can do what we want off to the side, and that's fine. But you have to uphold these tenets of the cult. Otherwise, you're an apostate and you need to be banished. And by the way, if you advocate for this one thing, it means you're all these other things. You are an alt-right, QAnon, conspiracy theorist. I mean, I was asked point blank, are you a conspiracy theorist? As if anybody says yes to that. I don't even think conspiracy theorists say yes to that. No, my answer, if I had thought of it, would be, yeah, you're conspiring against me. So I do actually believe in conspiracies at this point. I was, you know, I had to do an apology tour.
No, wait, no. Who? First of all, who asked you if you were a conspiracy theorist? First of all, you voted for Elizabeth Warren, right? In the Democratic primary, you're an Elizabeth Warren voter. So, but again, immediately, if you go against the status quo or the narrative or the establishment narrative on COVID, you are immediately a bad person. It's like a world of good people and bad people. I played a video of Fauci yesterday. He was saying we're good people all the way. Like, I don't know where this came from. Everybody in government is always supposed to be suspect. They're not. There's no good people, bad people. That's why we have a transparent. You're supposed to have transparency, so you don't have to rely on if someone's a good person or a bad person.
Well,
go ahead.
Well, so at one point, the sort of cacophony of complaints got to be enough that I was asked to do this apology tour where I would have to stand up in front of a certain subset of employees and apologize. I agreed to it, and I didn't apologize. I figured I'll explain myself. I thought of myself as convincing enough that perhaps I could build bridges. But I received an email from a colleague in corporate communications framing up what I should be prepared to do in this apology tour. It started with, are you a good person or a bad person? Are you with us or against us?
What does that even mean? But as all their kids are going to school, you're advocating for science, and now all of a sudden you're a bad person or a good person. We can't discuss your ideas. Where does that come from?
Well, I'm also advocating for the values I thought that we all had agreed to. I mean, San Francisco public schools are 60% low-income children. They're disproportionately Black and brown children. Here in the summer of 2020, we did all this, arm waving about equality of opportunity and fighting racism. And yet the one thing we could have actually done to help minority students in San Francisco and provide them with equality of opportunity is to advocate for schools to open, because the rich white children were in private schools and the other kids were not. But that was not the narrative, as you well know. The narrative of the Democratic Party was, you've got to lock down until I don't know when, no more COVID. The rule kept changing as to when that would be over, and you've got to support closed schools or else you want teachers to die and you want Black children to die. That was the narrative. If you challenged it, you were alt-right conspiracy theorist. I don't know.
Let me just read from that Substack you did with Barry Weiss, just very, very briefly, just to let people know exactly the environment you were kind of operating under, why you had to go on an apology tour. The comments from Levi's employees picked up about me being anti-science, about me being anti-fat, because I'd retweeted a study showing a correlation between obesity and poor health outcomes. 77% of the people who were hospitalized with COVID were overweight or obese. And that's a fact. So science now is racist, or anti-fat. About me being anti-trans, they said you were anti-trans because you tweeted that we shouldn't ditch Mother's Day in favor of Birthing People's Day because it left out adoptive and stepmoms. And about me being racist because San Francisco's public school system was filled with Black and brown kids, and apparently I didn't care if they died. The head of the HR department told me personally that even though I was right about the schools, that it was classist and racist that public schools stayed shut while private schools were open, and that I was probably right about everything else. I still shouldn't say so. I kept thinking, why shouldn't I? Okay, so I just want to let people know that. So then you were then asked, after you went on Laura Ingraham, you were then asked to go on an apology tour because a vocal minority of people at your company were calling you anti-fat, anti-trans, anti-science. And so they wanted you go ahead.
You'll appreciate this. I was also told I would need to answer questions about my husband. My husband was very vocal and has a more aggressive tone than I do. I have sort of a well-trained diplomatic voice of a woman in corporate America. He doesn't. He expressed a lot of criticism of mandates at first, vaccine mandates, and then of the vaccines themselves. He's been kicked off on Twitter of Twitter. He's still banished. He's still not been let back on by Elon, even with the Twitter files. 11,000 people were kicked off. He's one of them for COVID misinformation. So I was told I would also need to answer questions about him and his stances. And is he an anti-vaxxer? My answer to that was, what does that have to do with anything? He doesn't work here.
Wow. Okay. And so
but you have to disavow people, in this sort of cult-like situation. You have to, it's like Scientology and disconnection, right? You have to sever ties with people that don't believe, that are not true believers. And so I was expected to sort of disavow him, essentially. I couldn't disagree with him. That wasn't sufficient. I couldn't agree. None of it mattered. He didn't work there.
None of it matters. It didn't work there. So did you do the public apology tour?
I did not apologize.
How'd that go over?
I did the thing. I spoke and I explained myself and I took questions.
Because
but
you thought
explained myself.
You thought you would be, you're a good communicator and you could explain to people that you're just following science and this is actually out of concern for kids. And since all their kids are going to rich person school, and then what happened?
Well, that was June of 21 and it actually went pretty well. I heaved a sigh of relief. There were only 2 questions. I got some nice notes after saying this totally makes sense. I don't have children. I hadn't thought of it that way. It went well, but it was a very brief respite from the continuing onslaught.
And so when did
any goodwill generated dissipated quickly? Small minority of employees continued to complain. My peer, the head of corporate communication, delivered a dossier of my tweets and social media posts to the CEO, my boss, on a weekly basis.
Wow.
So, at this point, they were kind of gunning for me. And then, by the fall of 21, I had more followers, so a little more high profile. And I got some heftier trolls, and that made them nervous. They kept saying it was this reputational risk. And yet our stock price had doubled since I took over as brand president. Our business was great. There was no reputational risk. Nothing was happening. Then I was told I was still a candidate for CEO if I would stop tweeting. I said I wasn't going to stop tweeting and writing op-eds and all the other stuff. Yeah, that's him. I think they held it out at this point to get me to stop. I think by this point there was probably no intention, but he told me we need to do a background check on you and your husband. I agreed because I had no real choice. And I think to be CEO, that's probably pretty standard, probably not for your spouse, but for you. So I agreed. And 3 months late, I told him what would happen. There's no financial indiscretions, no crimes. I'm totally above board, but you're going to find the social media to be a gray area, and you're not going to want to continue. You're going to tell me I have to go, which is exactly what happened in January 2022. I was told there's no longer a place for you. We'll offer you severance, $1 million to walk away quietly. I did not want to sign a non-disclosure agreement, so I quit instead, and I resigned on February 13th, and the piece in Barry Weiss's Common Sense, now the Free Press, appeared on February 14th. And the next day, you'll find this interesting, 3 members of the San Francisco Board of Education were recalled by 75% of the voters in San Francisco because they refused to open the schools. So a majority agreed with me, but failed to speak up. So I looked like the lunatic, fringe, right, insane person.
And so, yeah, I had that happen to me too. I was advocating for schools to open, and while the Chicago Schools Union was not. And so then I was on social media, the big pharma trolls came at me, and I was called anti-union because
I got that one too.
Because I was advocating for children to go back to school, which was the science, and they didn't know the science. Just like nobody knows what the real science is on masks. Nobody knows what any of the science is on lockdowns. Nobody knows what's actually happening with the thing. And so, and I'm not allowed to say what's actually happening with the thing unless I go on Rumble. So, what happened after that? So you write the Barry Weiss on her Substack. Is there more to this story?
I mean, there's not a ton. I would say, there was a lot of press right after the piece went kind of viral that week. And I would say the press was fair. I wasn't painted as some demon. They had nothing to say. They were stunned that I would do such a thing. They couldn't imagine a world in which somebody would pass up money. That's beyond their kind of ability to even fathom. So, I'd broken some sort of code, like we stay quiet on this stuff and we take the money and we walk away. And that's not what I wanted to do, because I wanted to continue to advocate. And the thing beyond the kids that I had been pushing for and fighting for 2 years was to be able to express an opinion and have a conversation. Because the fact is, if we had had a societal-wide debate about this that was honest, that didn't silence doctors who had opposing opinions, the schools would have opened sooner. That's not what happened. And so I felt it was too important, the liberalism and silencing and censorship. I wasn't going to take money. That felt too hypocritical just to stay silent. So I didn't do that. That's what happened. And now on a daily basis, I get from people, I don't understand it. Schools opening, that's not even controversial. Well, I'll tell you, try to remember back through what a difference 3 years makes.
People have amnesia around COVID like nothing else. Like right now, people are running around going, they never said it stopped transmission. They never said it.
I mean,
they're running around saying that, with a straight face. So it just shows
and
you.
It's in writing.
It's everywhere. I have the videotape of them saying it. I have Fauci saying it. I have the head of the CDC saying it. I have them all saying it. I have Rachel Maddow saying it for 5 minutes straight. Anyway.
So how do they get away with it?
So
Believe
Leanna,
it.
you know Lena Wen, right? So she was a doctor who was popular. She writes op-eds for the Washington Post, and she was on CNN all the time as their go-to COVID person. And she was very much for the lockdown. She was very much for masking. And then she realized that her kid was having verbal developmental problems because of all the masking. And so she then started to so it woke her up. And she started to think for herself. And then she wrote this in the Washington Post. She wrote, as for most Americans, COVID in our family will almost certainly be mild. And like most Americans, we've made the decision that following precautions strict enough to prevent the highly contagious BA5 will be very challenging. Masking has harmed our son's language development, and limiting both kids' extracurriculars and social interactions would negatively affect their childhood and hinder my and my husband's ability to work. So she's turned around. She sounds like you now, and she was one of the most ardent lockdowners and maskers and all that stuff. She was a good cult member. And so she broke from the cult, and as soon as she wrote that, they all attacked her. They all went after her, and now she's a heretic. The same
Now
person,
everybody hates her.
yeah, now everybody hates her, right? Yeah.
Well, not to give her too much credit, because she vociferously advocated that the unvaccinated should not have basic civil rights, like being able to leave their homes, if you recall.
I do recall.
So, she was a fervent cult member. I'm glad she's seen the light, but because of that, both sides hate her, because the people who were anti-lockdown and anti-mandate from the beginning think she's terrible. And now the pro-lockdown, pro-closure, pro-maskers hate her because she's kind of walking it back a little bit. So she's got no home.
And so what is this? What does this make you think now? You used to, again, your whole life, you advocated, you're a lefty, you voted for Elizabeth Warren, you believed in free speech, and then now everything's kind of turned on its head. Right now, the Democratic Party is against free speech and they're for big pharma. And so what has this done to you and your idea about politics?
Well, I don't trust anyone. I think it's all a lie. They never believed any of the things they said. I feel maybe I was duped. Maybe I didn't see it. Maybe they changed. I don't know. It doesn't matter what happened in the past, but I'm certainly not a Democrat anymore, but I'm not running to the other side either. But I am disgusted with the Democrats more so at the moment, because I feel like at the end of the day, I don't actually think I've changed. I always cared about free speech. I cared about public education. I cared about opportunity for kids who were vulnerable. I still care about that. I didn't change. You just revealed yourselves to be hypocrites and liars. That's it. Everyone thinks, oh, you were red pilled, you were this. No, I'm exactly the same.
Yes, well, I will. That's exactly what I've said. Is like, no, I've stayed the same. I'm anti-establishment. I've said the same thing. I've been critical of the Democrats' corporatization. I didn't change, but because of Trump, I wasn't supposed to criticize the Democratic Party anymore. And that, if I did, that meant I was enabling fascists. I don't know if you saw Joe Biden and the Democrats, which control all of federal government right now, just ended the railroad workers' ability to organize and strike. So when a government comes together with a corporation to screw the workers, that is fascism. So this idea that voting for Joe Biden and the Democrats was somehow fighting fascism, you're a chump if you think that. Democracy was not on the ballot. Your democracy was stolen decades ago by corporate America. Go ahead.
No, as we've seen, the social media censorship, like Elon hate, it doesn't matter. Social media, private companies worked hand in hand with the government to censor, deplatform, blacklist, I don't care what you call it, to censor everyday Americans who challenged all of these insane, harmful mandates. If you wanted to do an anti-lockdown or anti-mandate protest in 2020 and you posted a notification for that protest, it was removed by every social media platform. So that's fascism. That is private social media companies carrying water for the Democratic Party. They're working in lockstep, whether they were doing so under direct guidance or direct insistence from the government, or just doing it as lackeys. I don't know what another word is. It's the same thing. They're so integrated. And by the way, the press didn't hold anyone accountable. They did the same thing. The press did not operate as the fourth estate or whatever estate it's supposed to be. They published government-issued talking points as if they were news. They didn't interrogate the data. I am a normal, regular person with basic math skills, and I could interpret the data and understand it. Why couldn't the science reporters from the New York Times?
So I asked this question the other day. It was in the data.
Always.
It was in the data that Pfizer submitted that they never even tested for transmission. They never even tested it. So and I asked, why wasn't there some science writers or some doctors who do writing? Didn't they look at the data? Didn't they know this? They knew this at the beginning of the vaccine rollout, and nobody reported it. It didn't get reported until a member of the European Parliament questioned an executive by Pfizer and asked directly, did you test to see if it stopped transmission? And she said, no, of course we didn't. Of course.
But the press let them get away, and they now say they never said it stopped it, but we all have it on video. We know Borla said it. They all said it. Walensky said it. Fauci said it. You won't get infected and you won't transmit. It was right there. All you had to do was read the footnotes. Why wouldn't a reporter do that? Because they just read the press release and they didn't challenge any of them. They never asked any questions. They didn't interrogate the issues. I lost my train of thought, but that's the fascism. So all of this, we've all been accused of fascism, right wing. I'm like, it's right in front of your eyes. It's happening. I was locked in my home. Playgrounds were closed. I couldn't leave the house for however many months. We were policed. When we were finally let outside the house, we were policed because you weren't allowed to be with members outside your household. Citizens were encouraged to tell on other citizens. There was a hotline number you could call in San Francisco to, tattletale. I mean, this is like
East
China. Germany?
This is like that's right. This is like East Germany before the fall. That's what this feels like. This is what when I grew up. This is what I was told life was like in the Soviet Union. That's what I was told. Everybody's suspicious to everybody. The government wants you to tell on even if it's your parents, you're supposed to turn them in. All that. That was the myth I was told about growing up under communism. And now it's here. Right, like I was just saying before, since 9/11, they have every telephone call you make. They have every text you send. They have every email you send. They have it. They're not collecting it. They are collecting it, and it's all. And so now when the news media is funded by Big Pharma up to 70%, they basically they are just an extension of Big Pharma, and so you can't believe anything they say ever. Look at the unbelievable lies that they've told. Look what the lies they told about ivermectin, that it was some kind of horse medicine instead of what it actually is, a Nobel Prize winning human medicine that's on the WHO list of essential medicine. That's not only saved millions of lives, it saved billions of lives. It was considered a wonder drug before COVID, and the reason why they had to demonize it and made you think it was horse poison was because on the chance it could treat COVID, they couldn't get their emergency use authorization for their vaccines, and they would lose $100 billion. And so that's why, just the most unscrupulous, unethical behavior by everybody in the media, 100%. I'm here telling the truth about it. And YouTube, Google, which is again the establishment, and I'm sure they own vaccine. Oh, by the way, Google is in bed with vaccine companies, and so they don't let you. So I'm not allowed. I've been unfairly censored on YouTube, right? And they won't even give me the data. I go, well, what did I say? We can't show you. What? You can't show me what I said that was wrong? No, that's an internal document. We can't show you. So that's the kind of garbage that you've gone through. That's the kind of garbage we've gone through. And I never thought I would see it in America, where we value free speech, where we value questioning authority. I can't believe that this whole society used to be about do your own thing, question authority. Apple say think different. And as soon as COVID happened, that all went away and we became a cult, and you weren't allowed to step out of line.
Yeah, it's true. I think the reason my story resonated so much is Levi's is like the epitome of those American values. It was about rugged individualism. I traveled to Moscow when I was a teenager to compete in the Goodwill Games in 1986. I brought 20 pairs of 501s to trade. Like, that was valuable currency. That's what the Russian athletes wanted. It was 1986. they meant freedom in all the best ways. But I think what I find most alarming is everything you say is true, and somehow it makes you the conspiracy theorist, but people seem all too willing to trade those values, free speech, the ability to congregate, protest. They seem willing to trade it for perceived safety. They're being promised some idea of safety, which is always how the authoritarians take over. It is always, they offer safety. It's too dangerous to have these other things. That's why you can't have them, but we're going to give you safety in exchange. But they don't see it. It's so clear, like the board is laid out. And yet everyone seems, not everyone, many seem all too willing to accept that exchange. I'll take safety, and I'll take fitting in with the group, and I'll take feeling virtuous for upholding these talking points rather than challenge and fight for basic freedoms.
Well, I just want to remind people, this was the former CEO of Levi's, and his name is Chip Berg, and he offered you, well, first he said that, he basically intimated that if you don't shut up, you're not going to become CEO. And if you do shut up, you will become CEO. And you kept talking, and then he said, okay, we're going to fire you, and we'll give you $1 million if you shut up about what happened. And you walked away from $1 million that he offered you, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so I just want to get that out there. So that should give her some bona fides in telling her story. And of course, people are going to call you a grifter. I don't know what your grift is here. You lost everything, to tell the truth, just like we did here. Lost all my friends and everything, and almost lost my channel. But you've been called a grifter, correct?
Constantly. I mean, this is a really crappy grift. I got to tell you, I made a lot more money before. I mean, I am bad at this grifting thing. Yeah.
Okay.
This is a man who makes over $40 million a year. That's what a CEO at Levi's makes.
Really? $40 million?
Well, with stock, I mean,
yeah.
Under the cover of COVID, the company laid off 15% of its workforce, close to 1,000 people. The business was tough. As you can imagine, the stores were closed, laid off 15% of the workforce, bolstered the stock price. During the same time frame, he cashed out $43 million worth of stock.
Wow.
He said the layoffs were done. You want to talk about anti-worker? He said the layoffs were done with empathy. It was, all couched in his flowery language, and everybody believed it. They believed it was woke and it was good and we were taking care of people. But he took care of himself. That's who he took care of. And that's, in part, in addition to telling my story, which we've just discussed, I really kind of challenge the woke capitalism, as I call it. These companies and CEOs, they wrap themselves in this cloak of wokeness, and it's a lie. They're all about money, as they always have been. The pro-worker, socially just thing to do would have been to keep those folks in their jobs, even if it meant less profit and a challenged stock price. And actually, you know what? Say the stores need to open because we need to employ people. There's a lot of people counting on these jobs. They feed their families from these jobs. Let's open the stores. That's not what we did. We upheld the Democratic Party principles. You got to shut down the world. I'll stay home in my, fancy place and order Uber Eats and Netflix and tell everybody else to stay home, and then get rid of 15% of the workforce.
Now, can you speak? So it's good to see that you're not afraid to be critical of Levi's. That's good, and you're not afraid because you didn't take the $1 million, so now you can speak freely. You have your voice. What did Levi's do in Haiti? And didn't they squash the move to get minimum wage for their workers that make the Levi's?
Oh, goodness. You're going to ask me about something I don't think I know very much about. I mean, I will say this. Beyond Haiti, all of Levi's production and supply chain was offshored in the mid to late 90s. They were really the last American company to sell off American factories and made in the USA. Good or bad, whatever. But all of it is offshore. They don't make product in China, so I'll give them a little credit for that. They sort of had been exiting China over the years because of the lack of transparency. What I had often pushed for, and I didn't run supply chain, so not my area, the idea of a living wage. That is not what is paid in these countries. The company has strict what they would call terms of engagement. The factories are said to be monitored for working conditions. I think that's not totally clear. And there's definitely not a living wage being paid.
And what is that? What do people do? So how do you walk around Levi's making $40 million a year, knowing that the people who are creating that profit for you don't even have a living wage? What kind of disconnect has to happen in your brain?
That is a great question. One, I think they start to believe the lie. They take all these stances and these social justice causes, and they want to be viewed as good and liked, like Sam Bankman-Fried saying, we do this so people will like us. But they actually start to believe it about themselves. Greed is no longer good. It's not enough to be super rich. You've got to also be, put on a pedestal as this great social justice warrior. But really, somewhere in their brain, they know it's really about the money. And the way they justify what you just said is, well, we can't attract the best talent if we don't pay them this much. That's just the rules of the game.
Okay, that's it. That's how they do it. Okay. Well, listen, Jennifer, we're out of time. I'd love to have you come back on when we have more time. We can talk about it. It's a fascinating story about you as a gymnast and what gymnasts have to go through. I have no idea. All the pain and especially when you went through it, it was worse back then in the 80s, right? All the sexual and everything you went through. It's just nuts. And how you broke your femur, and then you for 2 years you competed with a broken ankle, even though your doctor kept saying it's not broken, and so you had to come. Anyway, I'd love to have you come back on and just tell that whole story. That would be fantastic. Would you? We'd love to have you.
I'd love it.
Okay.
I'd love it. I can't believe you made me look at a picture of Chip for the last 20 minutes.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Okay. All right. Jennifer Say, former executive at Levi's, and she's a freedom fighter. She's out there speaking for our freedom of speech and advocating for children and for an exchange of ideas is what we're supposed to have in this country. So thank you for doing that. You took a lot of shots and you're going to continue to, but I really salute you. Thanks for doing that.
Thanks, Jimmy. Thanks for having me.
Hey, we're doing live stand-up comedy in Los Angeles, December 9th, 16th, 23rd, and 30th. And we're going to be in Tempe, Milwaukee, Minneapolis, Nashville. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for all those tickets. See you there.